If you've watched the first part of this video essay series on the Devil May Cry series, I mentioned that despite all the flaws the first Devil May Cry game had, it was overall a very enjoyable game and an interesting first impression. I was eager to try out all the other games, and the next one on my list was one of the most infamous titles, and muttering these words will make any gamer sigh in displeasure. Devil May Cry 2. This is regarded as one of the worst games in the franchise, right next to its edgy reboot named DMC Devil May Cry, and for the longest time, I never understood why. The most I knew about it was from the infamous Vinesource line of "Play DMC 2 is the best!" So I asked my mates who recommended me this series to me why it was so bad.
Alright. So yeah, hey bro, what is the general consensus on DMC 2 or Devil May Cry 2?
Well, how do you wish hard enough that something wasn't canon?
Anything you want to add, lads?
Play DMC 2 is the best! Hey, play DMC 2, it's the best!
DMC 2 is one of those games that you have to play not for the reason of it's a good game, you have to play it, but to understand and experience how mundane, uninspiring, and lackluster a game can be when handled with a rushed development on top of an inexperienced team, and after finishing it, I felt empty. Nothing made me focus and excited like the first game did, and I genuinely like to pretend this game doesn't exist so I can sleep at night. Talking about the development for this game is depressing to say the least, as Kamiya and the previous team known as the Little Devils, who worked on the first game, weren't going to be working on the sequel. Instead, an unknown director was in charge for the project, yet Capcom was dissatisfied with the lack of work and assigned Hideki Itsuno as the director around the tail end of the project with 4 to 5 months remaining in order to steer the project into the right direction. Which is why DMC 2 feels lackluster with multiple different ideas thrown around, as well as half-baked in that regard. It's disappointing to say the least, since Itsuno legit worked his ass off just to get this game done that was barely even worked on to begin with. They grabbed staff from the arcade division of Capcom, staff working on other games, and literally just anyone, just to get this game into a finished state, which is something highly commendable to pull together. Itsuno later went on to work on arguably the greatest title within this series, that being Devil May Cry 3. You could say this was Capcom's apology for throwing Itsuno in DMC 2's development, but that's a story for another time. What DMC 2 came down to was that they had great ideas on paper, but they failed to achieve it within execution due to the limited time. The vision of the game being this urban, open-like world sounded awesome, and they really wanted to top the previous title and how much content is in it. However, much of the team were either inexperienced or from the arcade division, a bunch of people that weren't 100% certain on making a sequel for a fully fledged action hack-and-slash game that was nothing like other games within the PS2's library. Like the first game, I'll be covering the 3 aspects being the story, the combat and gameplay, as well as the music. I'll also be comparing this game from the first title to truly understand why this game is regarded as the black sheep within this legendary series. Mentioned in the first video, Devil May Cry isn't super well known for its story. However, the first entry made a pretty good attempt to establish both great characters such as Dante and Trish, as well as memorable bosses such as Phantom and Griffin through dialogue and putting up a decent challenge for the player. I don't know how DMC 2 made Dante boring, but they did. In fact, everything relating to the story was just boring, dull, and genuinely an unexciting experience. There was probably just one line in the entire game that I kinda smiled due to how cheesy it was. The story just feels really out of place, and some of the shit that happens just makes no sense. Like one minute you're going around this town doing Dante stuff, and then the island explodes. And then this old lady asks Dante to take down these bosses that have no interesting character, dialogue, put up any sort of challenge, and are just mere obstacles as well as defeating Arius, probably the most generic villain whose only motive is to gain demonic power to rule the world. You do all of this in order to hear a story about Dante's past of him being the son of Sparta, but Dante enters hell in order to defeat the most generic final boss with no interesting character or motives, and the game just ends with Dante riding his motorbike in hell. I'm not joking, that's the story. No goofs, I'm 100% serious. That is just the story. Calling it a story would be praising it, honestly. It's more of a series of events that really have little to no connection with each other. The reason what made DMC 1 stand out so much from the competition of the PS2's library was that all the encounters with the bosses in DMC 1 were memorable, due to them either posing as an actual threat or providing a decent challenge. It gave him a sense of urgency and had some very well thought out dialogue. Dante was this semi-serious character, but he wasn't shy to crack some jokes and taunt his enemies. And the ending was pretty good of killing Mundus, the man who legit killed Dante's mother, and escaping out of Mallet Island on a plane. It's not the greatest story, but it was engaging and fun. None of the characters, not even the badass female side character Lucia, was just not engaging. Trish had very little character, but at least there was some character development, that being that she was a puppet controlled by Mundus in order to manipulate Dante. However, throughout Dante's journey and hearing about Dante's connection with his mother Eva, she begins to build a connection with Dante and showed human emotions after defeating Mundus. There is literally nothing interesting about Lucia or any other characters in the game, even Dante. By stripping away the cocky nature of Dante and making him this cold, straight to the point character with nothing interesting about him, why should I care?
But it's relevant to the canonical timeline, though.
Alright, fine. I understand that Dante may be a bit cold due to the guilt that he might have killed his brother during the adventures on Mallet Island, but here's the problem. Making serious characters are great. You have to give them a reason why players should care so much about them, such as motives, a personality, and other aspects about them to make them likable. Like, here's an example. Why the hell do we love Sephiroth? Or, why is he the most iconic villain in gaming? It's due to his status of being the greatest soldier and the connection that Cloud has with him when he inherits Zack's memories and legacy. His realization of his mother Genova's extraterrestrial powers that he wishes to gain, and that fucking sword. Why do we love Solid Snake? He was this interesting man that straight up a superhuman that took down a weapon known as Metal Gear that could destroy mankind, and someone who sneaks around in a cardboard box. He had a compelling story of growing up on the battlefield, yet deep down, he does have emotions differentiating from who he's connected with. Plus, I think that David Hayter is an absolute legend.
Excuse me, customer. There's both Cool Ranch and Nacho Cheese Shells here. Which would you prefer?
Cool Ranch, please.
On it. Kept you waiting, huh? That'll be $1.49.
There is no real explanation or real motivation to care about Dante besides go and beat the villain in order to hear the story about your past. Which is kinda hard to care about when Dante and every single character and boss is less interesting than a burnt piece of toast. Especially when the dialogue is either ridiculous,
My dream, my life. I was going to be the king of this world.
King? Yeah. Here's your crown.
or just flat out boring.
Don't you want to hear the story about Sparta from my TA?
I know. He did the same thing. Hold on to my coin, Lucia.
Now, I'm gonna be honest, at one point I forgot I was playing a DMC game, which is a huge fucking problem when the story is just so bare bones. DMC 2 Dante's character is like one of those generic OCs people make with these tragic backstories and giving them the most lame and stereotypical personality trait. I know that the team didn't have much time to work on the story due to a time constraint, but good lord, is it awful. When DMC Devil May Cry does a better job telling a story that I can give a shit about, that's a bit of an issue with dialogue like...
I'm stronger. I'm smarter. I'm better looking. And I got a bigger dick.
He has a fucking fedora. He looks like a bloody redditor. Oh boy, there is a lot to explain in this section, since I am genuinely shocked at how DMC 2's combat was handled, especially coming from the first game. A quick sum of how bad it is. Just take everything good about DMC 1's combat and just downgrade it. AKA, everything sucks now. Most people who have played or even heard about DMC 2 know how infamous the guns are in this game. It being extremely overpowered that I could just hold down the button, check my notifications on my social medias, and boom, the boss is defeated. However, before I start ripping the combats to shred, I do want to talk about a few positive aspects about the combat. There are some mechanics about DMC 2 that I really do like, such as the wall run. While being very impractical in combat, it's a fun little gimmicky move Dante had, having a dedicated dodge button, which was a bit of an issue that some players had in DMC 1, and while I do believe it was a good addition, I think the dodging mechanic was fine in the first game besides one fight. Some of the new gun moves such as Twosome Time and Rainstorm were really interesting concepts which got added and revamped into the styles of DMC 3, such as Trickster and Gunslinger. and I do think the mechanic of the amulet system to use different element attacks and different perks during Devil Trigger was an interesting concept. There are some cool concepts such as the way how your sword can do up to combos from 3 to 6 hits, however, with a lot of these ideas they had, they either didn't work in execution, or they are just watered down previous moves and mechanics by just doing them dirty. And let's start off with that sword combo that I mentioned. Nowhere in the game do they mention how to pull it off, and is only mentioned in the manual, which in itself is pretty vague. It's a matter of experimenting and just needing to look up how to do them. The entire combo system was changed, which really sucks. DMC1 was solid with its combat. It took a little bit of time to get used to, but it was overall really good. All you gotta do is just a few pauses and that's about it, really. Comparing this game from its predecessor, it's like night and day, as it's been streamlined to shit. Want a proper lock-on system? Yeah, that ain't happening. Want to feel really cool hitting some of these moves? In your dreams, kid! Want these dope as fuck cutscenes of receiving weapons? That requires effort. Want to have these dedicated moves that you need to buy with red orbs? What do you have, bozo brain? One of my biggest challenge in this game was needing to hit a switch, because of the auto lock-on system being fundamentally broken in this game. That's a massive issue. The biggest challenge in this game was not the enemies, not the bosses, not dealing with the shitty camera or the broken combat system. It was the fucking lock-on system for hitting a switch. I know I don't really get angry often, but how could a game such as Ocarina of Time, a game that was released in 1998, have a better lock-on system than a game 5 years after Ocarina of Time was released? I really do appreciate the fact that they have a UI that tells me what enemy I'm locked on, but when I'm trying to pull off some combos, I don't want to be interrupted by doing a move such as Stinger or High Tide, since the auto lock-on system locks onto a completely different enemy because they are the closest thing to me. You know, I take back everything negative I say about lock-on from DMC1. At least by locking on, I know what enemy I'll be hitting, even if there's no UI for it. What's the point of manually locking on when the game does it for me and plays the game, what's the closest thing to Dante? Look, all I wanted was a UI from the manual lock-on and to fix the auto lock-on system. I got the UI, great, but the auto lock-on system is even more infuriating than the first game. Great. Speaking of previous moves, all the moves just feel like a downgrade and you feel no impact hitting any moves. In DMC1, you have these chunky sounds that play when hitting your enemies, such as Stinger, Helmbreaker, and Vortex. It felt really good in the ear wanting to do that. With moves such as Stinger in DMC1, you could pull off a cool technique called Stinger Jump, which carries the momentum of Stinger's thrust near a ledge, allowing for some serious distance. It's not important for the core game, but it's a neat little trick for the hardcore and speedrunners for DMC, and it's been implemented from even as far as the latest entry, Devil May Cry 5. Here's what it looks like in DMC2. It's pathetic. They butchered it. What the fuck happened to it? How did they fuck it up from this to whatever the fuck this is? With Alistair and Ifrit, you have these really cool as fuck cutscenes to show off what's in store for you, as well as a small arena of enemies to test these weapons out. Here's how you get a weapon in DMC2. It's boring. And it just doesn't feel exciting getting a new weapon, especially when the game does describe the swords to have different lengths. I don't really feel a difference as I only use Rebellion through my playthrough. The reason why Alistair and Ifrit were awesome and interesting was that they were vastly different playstyles and provided different move pools. Why should I get excited at getting 3 swords that barely have any significant changes from each other and do the exact same fucking combos? One aspect I always enjoyed about the first game was heading to the Divinity statue to listen to that eerie track and unlocking some really cool moves such as Vortex, Meteor, Kick 13, and feeling awesome that I unlocked these cool as hell moves. Do they have any moves to unlock in the weapons you attain? Nope! You're stuck with what you got. Have fun. Also, off topic on the combat, I've seen this level a lot being noticeable for having its checkpoint for completing a level bug that you have to basically do it twice, just so you can hit the checkpoint. I somehow bugged out and fell out of bounds. I don't know how that happened. Joxic, you absolute bozo brain, you know that Lucia's story is actually better than Dante. If you generally think that's the case, then you have very low expectations. Why would I want to play a game that I already don't like to start with a character more uninteresting than a stale piece of burnt toast? Speaking of levels, it's just depressing just how bland the environments are. that's all I could say really. DMC2 had a lot of great opportunities and ideas to work with, however, there are so many things to criticize this game for, such as the camera, the enemy AI being extremely dumbed down, the game being just piss easy, but I'll be here for hours listing off everything. Checking out all the concept art for DMC1 showed off unreleased enemies, a ton of cool artworks, and even unreleased weapons. Some of the designs for unreleased enemies looked really cool, having the Resident Evil aesthetic to it, and it would have been awesome if the sequel grabbed those ideas and brought them to life. Alas, a lot of these enemies weren't grabbed from the unreleased concepts, and most of the enemies just feel very generic, such as the rock golem, satanic goat creatures, and the community's favorite infested chopper. I believe DMC2 had some good ideas, but due to the time constraints, it fell abysmally short. One thing I will give credit for is the soundtrack, because it's actually pretty good. But it's the case of stacking it up against the other titles in the series, it doesn't stand out too well. That being said, I'm not going to downplay the music because it does a really good job of setting the atmosphere for whatever the hell the story and game tried to be. For each iteration of Dante, the series has music that relates to the characteristics of Dante through his tone, as well as his clothing. For DMC2's case, it has a darker metal feel to it, with tracks such as Dante's battle theme Fire Away, which reminds me a lot of the band Camelot, and the more ambient tracks giving an eerie resemblance to the style DMC1 did, but there's aspects of some tracks having vibes of other songs. So, for example, the mission start theme reminds me a lot of Super Metroid. While the total results screen sounds familiar, but I can't really put my finger on what it reminds me of. DMC2 Dante's attire also reflects a more gothic, regal vampire look, and in my opinion, it's probably one of the best looking Dantes in the series, which the community knows it as the Dante with the cool jacket. This style reflects Dante's inner demons, and the guilt he has towards believing he killed his brother Virgil when it comes to the boss fight of Nero Angelo in DMC1. The divinity statue in this game does an amazing job for setting the eerie and depressing atmosphere. The chanting is back, with a more somber tone this time. I love the Divinity Statues theme in all the DMC games since they perfectly encapsulate and explain the tone and characteristics for Dante through nothing but music, as the Divinity Statues reinforces Dante's cold, demoralizing character. Overall, the music for the most part is pretty good. There's a handful of ominous and action tracks I like, so I'll go down the list. My personal favorite tracks would be the Mission Start theme, Fire Away, Wings of the Guardian, Cursed Giant, Blast Off, Shoot the works. Bust the beast. And holy shit, I despise the scene, but it's criminal that it's short, but I absolutely love Sacred Tears. I could finally put this game to rest and never need to talk about or think about this game ever again. In conclusion, is DMC2 a bad Devil May Cry game? Yes, that's a given. Is it a bad game? No. If it was a standalone game with different title, like Angels Are Glad or some shit, it'd be a mediocre game with shitty controls and a kick-ass soundtrack. I can give some slack that the game was in this state with only a few months worth of polish, but it doesn't excuse that this is a heaping load of shit in an almost flawless series. Be sure to tune into the next game I will be reviewing for the series, Devil May Cry 3. Hope you all take care out there. I love you all. I need to get some rest.